Hi guys, Holly Agar here, and in today's video I'm going to be discussing writing believable characters. For me, the character really is the heart of the story. I can pick up a book again if I've made a connection with the main character. That doesn't mean that they have to be likable, that they don't have flaws, but the main thing is that your character is realistic, and I want to spend time with them because they're interesting. So how do we achieve this? It's important to get the character right. Today I'm going to give you a few tips that you can use. Number one, backstory. I think it's important to spend a bit of time developing your character's backstory before you start to write, particularly with a longer project like a novel. I have in the past, with shorter works, like with a short story, not put any planning into writing my characters and just, started writing freestyle. And that worked too. But really, if you're writing a novel, it's worth taking the time and creating a backstory for your characters. So what does that look like? I have on my website, hollyagar.com, under the heading Publishing Tips, posted a character profile sheet. If you want to nab mine, then that works. And on my character profile sheet, I have headings like their hair color, their height, the kind of clothes they wear, but also, questions that have to do with their personality, with what, let's say, their reoccurring problem is in life. I don't know if you've noticed, but most people have one big problem that keeps coming up in their lives, and it just shows up in a slightly changed form. So what does that look like for your main character at the age of 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, however, whatever their age is? It seems like every person has one problem that keeps returning to them. I find that to be a very useful question, and it gets me thinking about the character over a long period of time and how they've changed and evolved and tried to adapt, or how they haven't changed. So the character backstory is really worth working on because it means that you will hesitate less. It means that you can proceed with your writing with confidence and the flow can continue. When I'm not sure about a character, I find myself pausing a lot. And it can kill your confidence when you're writing and then you just think, well, I have no idea what this character would do. But if you've spent time creating a character profile, then it will come naturally to you. The decisions your character would make just seem logical. Another thing that you can do if you don't really like creating character profile sheets, or in addition to your character profile sheet, I recommend daydreaming about your characters. I have a very visual memory, and so for me it really helps to picture my characters as they go about in their daily lives. And that way I really get a sense of who they are and I feel more confident again when it comes to writing them. So tip number one was really to spend the time on creating a convincing backstory, if nothing else, but to give you the confidence to move forward with the project. Okay, so number two, I wanted to discuss with you social context. What does that mean? It means that every person belongs to a society that has its own codes. It has a power structure. It's really important for you to consider how your character fits into this power structure that they're a part of. Because depending on who they are, for instance, depending on their gender, their race, their ableism, their sexual orientation, depending on a lot of different factors, they will perceive the world in a different way, in a slightly different way, because they've had these identities that has filtered their perceptions. I mean, their perceptions have filtered through these identities. So it's really important to acknowledge where your character sits within the wider social context. And that means that you're less likely then to create characters who are stereotypes. Oftentimes stereotypes happen when we don't consider things like how the character's ethnicity or age or gender might play into a situation that they're in, how they would act, how others perceive them. So it's really something that you need to take into consideration. At the same time, avoid reducing your character to these identities. Don't make your Iranian character, for instance, don't make their story arc all about being Iranian, and just that. You know, that's also stereotyping or putting someone into a box. A person is so many different things. For instance, in my book, Out of Touch, I have a British Iranian character named Sam, and his story arc is not really at all related to his ethnicity. We learn about his hobbies, the things he likes to do, his passions, etc. And you just need to keep that in mind with any character to make sure that you are giving them space to be a full human. Okay, so number 3, we're looking at dialogue. Dialogue is basically the voice of your character. And it's very important. It matters. It brings them to life on the page. And you do need to get this right. So obviously dialogue will be different for a character depending on things like their social class background, the region where they're from, their age. So if you're not really familiar with the demographic that you're writing about, really take the time to do the research with how these people would speak. You want to make sure you're being believable, and not having, let's say, a grandmother speak like they're a 20-year-old and vice versa. So put the time in to research the kinds of words that your character might use depending on where they're from, and all those factors that I've spoken about. Another thing to note about using dialogue: some writers don't like to use a lot of dialogue. Some don't, for stylistic reasons, put the speech marks in. But really, I think that it's useful to have dialogue within your writing, because you get a sense of movement, and it feels more immediate, your story. And also, it means that we have access to what other characters are thinking about, let's say, your protagonist. Okay, we get to hear their voices too. And through conversations, we get a good sense of what people are like. What isn't your character saying, for instance? What's off the table? What are people saying to your character? Is your character a rambler, or are they really succinct? So definitely dialogue is an important part of creating a believable character. And again, research is important in this area. And backstory will play into that as well. Let's say your character has always been quite shy. They are probably a person of few words when it comes to dialogue. I just wanted to recommend a book that I think does dialogue very well, and that is the book First Love by Gwendolyn Riley. The dialogue in that book, which is about a relationship, is just fantastic. It's the characters basically leap off of the page, and we get a real sense of tension through dialogue. I think she does that really well, Gwendolyn Riley, so it's worth checking out. The last thing I wanted to talk to you about when considering creating your characters is details. Details and observation, specifically. So the more you are specific in naming what your character is observing, the more they will feel like a 4-dimensional person, okay? And I'll give you an example of what that might look like. So in my novel, Out of Touch, the character Ava is in hospital because she's been knocked over by a car. Her first visitor is her good friend Jane. And so Jane comes to visit her in hospital, and Ava is sort of lying on the bed, on the hospital bed. Her friend is rambling on and on and on and on, and Ava's just not really paying attention to what her friend Jane is saying. But she notices for the first time that Jane has these hairs on her chin, and she's mesmerized by them, and she thinks, wow, you know, she had never noticed this about her friend that she's known for so long. And isn't it interesting how you can learn something new about a person when you look at them from a different angle? So basically, having Ava lying in the hospital bed in this very unique position gave her this opportunity to notice her friend sort of sitting above her, and then she noticed the hairs on her chin. So the specific circumstances Ava is in, paired with the detail of the hair on Jane's chin, made for a very interesting observation about Ava. How she's quite introspective, how she wonders what else she hasn't noticed about her surroundings, and how she could maybe learn a lot when she's not looking at things in the same way, how she can expand her mind when she's looking at the same subject in a different way. So using really specific details gives your character a voice, okay? And other authors who I think are amazing at doing this are people like Geniophil, who's written The Department of Speculation. There are so many examples of pointed observations in this book where a little detail will give us so much insight into the mind of a character and really make them feel like they are a living, breathing person. Another book that I really recommend for this, for noticing detailed observations, is The Vegetarian by Han Kang. The book is brilliant. It's about a woman who decides to become a vegetarian, and everyone around her disapproves of her decision. And from the very start of the book, when her husband is describing her, we learn so much about her, but we also learn a lot about him through his observations. He says, for instance, that his wife, when he met her, had the plainest shoes on, that she was really average, neither tall nor short. She was not particularly ambitious, and all of these details, all of these things suited him down to the ground. And we get this impression of the kind of person who likes to settle for someone who doesn't really challenge them or who he doesn't perceive as being particularly special. So to recap then, to create believable characters, spend some time on your backstory, the characters' backstories, and this will give you the confidence to write your characters in the different circumstances that they find themselves in. You'll know how they would react and what decisions that they would take. And so the next thing we talked about again was social context. Consider what social context your character lives in and how they fit within the power structures. What identities do they embody? Because this will affect how they perceive others and how they perceive themselves. The next thing that we talked about was dialogue and the importance of making sure that you've done the research, that you feel confident with writing the dialogue for the demographic that you've chosen. So you're using the right kinds of words and they're appropriate to the age, to a number of different factors relating to your character. And finally, we talked about the importance of details and observation and how you can use specific details, naming the thing, to make your character really feel like a living, breathing person. And that's all I have for today. Thank you for joining me, and remember to be kind to yourself.